It was September 26, 1983. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that seeps into the bones and makes everything feel just a bit off. Deep beneath Soviet soil, in the fortified bunker of Serpukhov 15, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov prepared for another routine night shift. The bunker was a labyrinth of steel and screens, its walls humming with the dull thrum of technology, a sound so constant it had become a part of the air itself. For Petrov, this night should have been like any other. Hours spent monitoring the Soviet Union's early warning satellite system for signs of American aggression. The Cold War had turned paranoia into policy, and every beep, every flicker of light was scrutinized for signs of an imminent nuclear attack. But tonight, something felt different. Petrov couldn't quite put his finger on it, but there was an edge to the air, a subtle wrongness that gnawed at the back of his mind. The bunker, usually a place of cold logic and order, felt oppressive, almost alive. He shook his head and dismissed the thought. This was no place for superstition. Only data mattered here. Then, the siren screamed. It was not the usual alarm that signaled a routine check or minor system issue. This was the piercing, bone-chilling wail that indicated the unthinkable, an incoming missile. Petrov's heart leapt into his throat as he turned to his console. His fingers trembled over the keyboard as his eyes locked onto the display. There it was, a single missile launched from the United States, its trajectory heading straight for Soviet soil. The warning lights flashed red, bathing the bunker in an ominous glow. The mechanical voice of the system declared its grim message: imminent attack detected. Seconds later, another alarm blared. Petrov's screen updated. 2 missiles now, then 3, then 4, then 5. The console's display filled with dire confirmation. Nuclear strike imminent. Petrov felt the weight of the moment crash down on him. This was it, the moment they had trained for, the beginning of the end. The Cold War's fragile peace had finally shattered. The bunker erupted into chaos. Technicians scrambled to their stations, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of panic. Orders were shouted, questions hurled into the air, but no answers came. Petrov's colleagues looked to him, the man in charge, for guidance. Protocol was clear: verify the attack, alert superiors, and prepare for retaliation. The Soviet Union's nuclear arsenal would respond within minutes, unleashing destruction on the United States. There would be no time to hesitate. Millions of lives hung in the balance, and Petrov's training demanded swift action. Yet, something didn't sit right. Petrov stared at the data on his screen, his mind racing. The system was flawless, designed to detect the heat signatures of missile launches with pinpoint accuracy. But the information felt wrong. The pattern was too clean, too perfect. It didn't match the chaotic unpredictability of a real nuclear strike. His gut twisted in conflict. Every second of delay increased the risk of devastation if the attack was real. Yet his instincts whispered that something was amiss. He scanned the data again and again, searching for any clue that might explain what he was seeing. Around him, the bunker seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the machines growing louder in his ears. The weight of the world rested on Petrov's shoulders. He was the commanding officer on duty, the final line of defense against annihilation. The system demanded action. His training screamed at him to trust the data. His superiors would expect him to follow protocol without question. But Petrov hesitated. His hand hovered over the phone that would connect him to high command, the call that would confirm the attack and trigger a retaliatory strike. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the chaos around him fade into the background. "No," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "It doesn't feel right." Petrov thought of his family, of the people sleeping in their homes, blissfully unaware of how close they were to destruction. He thought of the countless lives on the other side of the world, people who would never know his name, but whose survival depended on his decision. He picked up the phone and made his choice, not to escalate, but to wait. He reported the incident as a false alarm, defying protocol and trusting his instincts. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The alarms continued to blare, the bunker pulsing with tension. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the warnings ceased. The missile signatures disappeared from the screen. The data cleared. The system returned to its normal state, as if nothing had happened. It had been a false alarm. In the days that followed, the cause of the error was discovered. Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds had triggered the satellite sensors, creating the illusion of missile launches. A simple glitch in an otherwise flawless system, but one that had nearly plunged the world into nuclear war. Petrov's decision saved millions of lives, but he was not celebrated. His superiors reprimanded him for failing to follow protocol. Officially, the incident was buried, classified, and forgotten. Petrov returned to his post briefly, but eventually left the military, disillusioned by a system that valued obedience over reason. He faded into obscurity, living quietly in a small apartment outside Moscow. His life was unremarkable to the outside world. He spent his days repairing appliances for neighbors, reading novels, and reflecting on the night that defined him. Though he had no grand titles or accolades, Petrov bore the invisible scars of a man who had carried the weight of the world in his hands. Decades passed before his story surfaced. When it did, it came not from governments or official channels, but from journalists and researchers uncovering the truth. Petrov was reluctant to speak of that night, downplaying his role with a quiet humility. "I was just doing my job," he would say, though the world began to see him as something much more. By the time global recognition came, Petrov was older, his face lined with the years of solitude and quiet reflection. Awards from peace organizations trickled in, along with media interviews and invitations to speak about his actions. Yet, despite the belated praise, Petrov remained skeptical of the systems that had nearly destroyed humanity. "We were lucky," he often said, but luck is not a strategy. He became a symbol of the fragile balance between reason and destruction. His story a reminder of the humanity needed in an age dominated by machines. To the end of his life, Stanislav Petrov was a man who had acted not out of heroism, but out of a profound sense of responsibility. A decision that saved the world and shaped its history. Petrov passed away quietly in 2017. His story now a part of history's pages. Though he lived humbly and left no grand monuments, his legacy endures in the hearts of those who recognize the power of one person's courage to change the course of humanity.